The rancher shared his bread with her. That night, she gave him what no one ever had. Welcome back to our channel, where the untamed stories of the American frontier come alive. Before we dive into this incredible tale of kindness, resilience, and unexpected love, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss any of our captivating Western adventures. Here's something special we love doing. We want to connect with our amazing global audience. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're listening from. Are you tuning in from the heart of Texas, the busy streets of London, maybe from a cozy cafe in Paris, or perhaps from somewhere completely unexpected? We absolutely love hearing from our story family around the world. Now settle back and let us transport you to the harsh but beautiful landscape of Wyoming Territory in 1884, where survival meant everything. Kindness was rare, and where one simple act of sharing bread would change two lives in ways neither could have imagined. Chapter 1. The Stranger at the Gate. The Wyoming wind cut across the prairie like a blade, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Sam Harrison pulled his worn coat tighter as he guided his horse back toward the ranch house, the day's work finally done. At 28, Sam had been working this land for 6 years, ever since he'd saved enough to buy the small spread from a widow heading back east. It wasn't much, a modest house, a barn that needed constant repairs, and enough grazing land for about 50 head of cattle, but it was his, earned through back-breaking work and careful saving. More importantly, it was the first place he'd ever been able to call home. The sight that greeted him at his front gate made him pull up short. A young woman sat huddled against his fence post, her thin shawl providing little protection against the bitter wind. Even from a distance, Sam could see she was in a bad way. Her clothes were travel-worn and dirty, her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she clutched a small bundle to her chest like it contained everything she owned in the world. Which, Sam realized as he rode closer, it probably did. She looked up as his horse approached, and Sam felt something tighten in his chest. She was probably no more than 25, with large brown eyes that held a combination of exhaustion, wariness, and something that looked dangerously close to despair. Her face was pale from cold and hunger, but he could see the proud tilt of her chin, even in her current circumstances. "Ma'am," Sam said, touching the brim of his hat as he dismounted. "You all right?" The woman struggled to her feet, swaying slightly from weakness. "I'm sorry to be on your property, sir. I was just resting for a moment. I'll move along." Her voice carried a slight accent. Irish, Sam thought, though softened by years in America. There was education in her speech, too, which made her current situation all the more puzzling. "Where are you heading in this weather?" Sam asked, noting how she shivered despite trying to hide it. "Cheyenne," she said, lifting her chin with obvious pride. "I have prospects there." Sam looked at the gathering clouds on the horizon, then at the woman's thin shoes and inadequate clothing. Cheyenne was still 40 miles away, and a storm was coming that would dump snow across the territory. She'd never make it. "Ma'am, I don't mean to be forward, but you look like you could use a hot meal and a warm place to spend the night." "That storm's going to be a bad one." The woman's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or embarrassment. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Harrison. Sam Harrison. And it wouldn't be charity. It would be neighborly courtesy. My mother raised me to never let a person go hungry if I had food to share. I have no money to pay you." Sam studied her face, seeing the conflict there. Pride warring with necessity, desperation fighting with dignity. He recognized that struggle because he'd lived it himself. "Tell you what," he said, making his decision. "I've got a fence that needs mending, and my barn could use a good cleaning. If you're willing to work for your supper and a place to sleep, we could help each other out." The woman looked at him for a long moment, clearly trying to judge his intentions. Whatever she saw in his face must have reassured her, because some of the tension left her shoulders. "That would be acceptable," she said formally. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Just Sam will do fine." "And you are?" "Catherine O'Brien," she replied, then added with a touch of her former pride, "Miss Catherine O'Brien." Sam nodded and gathered his horse's reins. "Well then, Miss O'Brien, let's get you inside before this wind freezes us both solid." As they walked toward the house, Sam snuck glances at his unexpected guest. Catherine O'Brien carried herself like a woman who had known better days. There was grace in her movements despite her obvious exhaustion, and something in her bearing suggested she wasn't used to asking for help. The house wasn't much to look at, a simple wood-frame structure with 2 bedrooms, a main room that served as both kitchen and sitting area, and a stone fireplace that Sam had built himself. But it was clean and warm, and right now that seemed like everything Catherine O'Brien needed. "You can set your things there by the door," Sam said, hanging his hat on a peg. "I'll get the fire built up and see about some food." Catherine looked around the modest interior with something that might have been relief. "It's very nice," she said, and Sam could tell she meant it. "How is it simple, but it keeps the weather out. Sam knelt by the fireplace and began building up the fire. You said you were heading to Cheyenne. You have family there. Catherine was quiet for so long that Sam thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. I had a position as a governess for a family in Denver. When my employment ended, I heard there might be opportunities in Cheyenne. Sam heard what she didn't say, that she'd been let go, probably without much notice or severance. It was a common enough story in the territories where women had few options for supporting themselves. How long since you've eaten? He asked, moving to the kitchen area. I'm fine, Catherine said automatically, then added more quietly, yesterday. I had some bread yesterday morning. Sam felt anger flare in his chest, not at her, but at whatever circumstances had left a clearly educated, refined woman walking alone across the Wyoming prairie with nothing but the clothes on her back. Well, we'll fix that right now, he said, pulling ingredients from his simple pantry. Hope you don't mind simple fare. I'm not much of a cook, yeah, but I make a decent stew. As Sam worked, Catherine stood uncertainly by the fire, clearly unused to being in a stranger's home. She watched him move around the kitchen with economical movements, noting how he handled the domestic tasks with the same competence he probably brought to ranch work. You live here alone? She asked. Yes, ma'am. Have for about 6 years now. Sam glanced up from the vegetables he was chopping. Gets quiet sometimes, but I've got the cattle and my horse for company. Don't you get lonely? Sam paused in his work, considering the question. Sometimes, he admitted, but I've got my work and that keeps me busy. What about you? You have family back east. Catherine's face closed off slightly. Not anymore. Sam recognized the tone. It was the same way he sounded when people asked about his own family. Some stories were too painful to share with strangers, no matter how kind they seemed. Well, he said, returning to his cooking, sometimes the family we choose is better than the one we're born with. Something in his voice made Catherine look at him more closely. Sam Harrison was a tall man, lean from hard work, with brown hair that needed cutting and kind eyes that seemed older than his years. His hands were calloused from ranch work, but gentle as he prepared their simple meal. Mr. Harrison, Sam, she corrected herself. Why are you helping me? Most men would have ridden past without stopping. Sam ladled stew into 2 bowls and cut thick slices from a loaf of bread he'd bought in town the day before. Maybe, he said, setting the food on his small table. But most men weren't raised by Sarah Harrison. Your mother, the finest woman who ever lived, Sam said simply. She used to say that kindness was the only thing that separated us from the wild animals, that every person deserved to be treated with dignity, no matter their circumstances. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at his words. It had been so long since anyone had treated her with simple human kindness that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Catherine said, sitting down at the table. She was. Sam's voice grew soft. Lost her to fever 3 years ago, along with my father. That's when I came out here, needed a fresh start somewhere new. Catherine understood that need all too well. Sometimes the only way to heal was to go somewhere that didn't hold memories of loss. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, Catherine trying not to show how desperately hungry she was. The stew was simple but hearty, and the bread was fresh and filling. But more than the food, it was the warmth, both physical and emotional, that began to thaw something inside her that had been frozen for far too long. As she ate, Catherine found herself studying Sam's face in the firelight. There was something inherently trustworthy about him, something that went beyond his actions today. He ate without urgency, clearly making sure she had enough before worrying about his own hunger. When was the last time someone had put her needs before their own? This is wonderful, she said, meaning more than just the food. Sam smiled, and Catherine realized it transformed his entire face. Glad you're enjoying it. There's plenty more if you're still hungry. As the wind howled outside and snow began to fall against the windows, Catherine O'Brien found herself in the strange position of feeling safer than she had in months. She had no idea that this simple act of sharing bread would be the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. Chapter 2. More Than a Fair Trade. Catherine woke to the sound of wind rattling the windows and the soft crackle of a fire being rebuilt. For a moment, she was disoriented. The bed was too comfortable, the room too warm, the sounds too peaceful. Then memory flooded back. Sam Harrison, the storm, the first real meal she'd had in days. She'd slept in Sam's spare bedroom, a small but clean space with a quilted bed cover that smelled of lavender and sunshine. It had been months since she'd slept in an actual bed, and her body felt almost human again. Dressing quickly in her worn traveling dress, Catherine made her way to the main room. Sam stood at the kitchen area, already dressed for the day despite the early hour. He turned when he heard her approach. "Morning, Miss O'Brien. Hope you slept well. Better than I have in a very long time," Catherine admitted. "And please, call me Catherine." Sam nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Catherine it is. Coffee." "That would be wonderful." As Sam poured coffee from a pot that smelled like heaven, Catherine moved to the window. Snow had fallen steadily through the night, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. The storm showed no signs of letting up. "Looks like you'll be stuck here another day at least," Sam said, following her gaze. "The road to Cheyenne will be impassable until this clears." Catherine felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. Relief, because the thought of returning to the uncertain road filled her with dread. Guilt, because she was imposing on Sam's hospitality with no way to repay him. "About that work you mentioned," she said, turning to face him. "I meant what I said about earning my keep." Sam studied her face, noting the determined set of her jaw. "You sure?" "Some of it's rough work. Mr. Harrison, Sam, I may look fragile, but I assure you I'm stronger than I appear. I've been taking care of myself for quite some time now." Something in her tone told Sam there was a story there, one that probably involved more hardship than any woman should have to endure. "All right then," he said. "After breakfast, I'll show you around. Fair warning though, ranch work is different from household work." Catherine lifted her chin with familiar pride. "I'm a quick learner." Breakfast was simple. Eggs from Sam's small flock of chickens, more of that wonderful bread toasted over the fire, and coffee that tasted better than anything Catherine remembered drinking in Denver's finest restaurants. As they ate, Sam found himself studying his unexpected guest. In the morning light, he could see that Catherine O'Brien was a beautiful woman, but it was a beauty tempered by hardship. There were shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights, and her hands, though graceful, showed the calluses of someone who'd been doing manual work despite her educated background. "Tell me about this governess position," Sam said gently, "if you don't mind my asking." Catherine's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "The Ashford family in Denver. I taught their 2 daughters for almost 3 years. Music, literature, French, deportment, all the things wealthy young ladies are supposed to know. Sounds like you were good at it." "I thought I was." Catherine's voice grew quiet. "Mr. Ashford apparently thought I was good at other things as well." Sam's jaw tightened. As understanding dawned, he made advances. "When I refused him, he told his wife I had been inappropriate with him. She dismissed me immediately with no references and no severance." Catherine stared into her coffee. "In Denver, the Ashfords' word is law. No family would hire a governess who had been dismissed for impropriety." Anger flared hot in Sam's chest. He'd seen this story before. Powerful men who felt entitled to whatever they wanted, and women who paid the price for having principles. "That's why you're heading to Cheyenne. Fresh start, new territory, I hoped." Catherine shrugged. "I hoped distance might help." Sam reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry that happened to you, and I'm glad you stood your ground even when it cost you everything." Catherine looked down at his work-roughened hand covering hers. When was the last time someone had touched her with simple kindness, with no expectation of anything in return? "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." After breakfast, Sam led Catherine outside to show her around the ranch. The snow had stopped falling, but the wind was still bitter. Catherine pulled her thin shawl closer, and Sam noticed immediately. "Here," he said, disappearing into the house and returning with a heavy wool coat. "Sass, this was my mother's. She was about your size." Catherine hesitated. "I couldn't." "She would have insisted," Sam said simply. "Sarah Harrison never let anyone go cold if she could help it." The coat was warm and smelled faintly of roses. As Catherine wrapped it around herself, she felt like she was being embraced by the memory of a woman she'd never met but already admired. "Better?" Sam asked. "Much. Thank you." Sam showed her the barn first, a sturdy structure that housed his horse, a milk cow and feed for the winter. The chickens had their own coop attached to one side, and Catherine was charmed by their indignant clucking at the snow. "The fence that needs mending is over there," Sam said, pointing to a section where the wind had blown down several posts. "It's not dangerous work, but it requires patience. Posts need to be reset. Wire needs to be restrung properly." Catherine examined the damaged fence with a critical eye. "I can handle that. What about the barn cleaning you mentioned? Stalls need mucking, hay needs to be moved. General organization. It's dirty work." "I'm not afraid of dirt, Sam." Something in the way she said his name made Sam look at her more closely. Catherine stood in his mother's coat, snowflakes catching in her dark hair, looking more determined than any woman should have to be. But there was something else in her expression, a kind of desperate gratitude that made his chest ache. "All right then," he said. Let's get you some work gloves. They spent the morning working side by side. Catherine attacked the barn cleaning with methodical efficiency, clearly someone who understood the value of honest work. Sam found himself stealing glances at her as he worked on repairing a broken bridle. She hummed softly as she worked, old Irish melodies that floated through the barn like memories of home. Her movements were graceful, even as she mucked stalls, and she spoke gently to the animals as if they were old friends. "You're good with them," Sam observed, watching her stroke his horse's nose. "I grew up around animals," Catherine said. "Before my father died, we had a small farm in Massachusetts. I used to help with everything, milking, feeding, cleaning. My governess skills came later, when we moved to the city." "What happened to the farm?" Catherine's hand stilled on the horse's neck. "Debts. After father died, we discovered he owed more than the farm was worth. Mother sold everything to pay what she could, then took work as a seamstress. I became a governess to help support us. And your mother. Influenza 2 years ago." Catherine's voice was matter-of-fact, but Sam heard the pain underneath. "After that, I was completely on my own." Sam understood that isolation all too well. "It's hard being alone in the world." "Yes," Catherine said simply. "It is." They worked in comfortable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. As the day progressed, Sam found himself increasingly impressed by Catherine's competence. She approached every task with intelligence and determination, never complaining about the physical demands or the cold. But more than that, he found himself enjoying her company in a way he hadn't expected. It had been 3 years since he'd had another person in his house, and he'd forgotten how pleasant it could be to share meals and conversation with someone who understood both work and loss. By late afternoon, they had accomplished more than Sam usually managed in 2 days alone. Catherine had cleaned the barn thoroughly, organized his feed supplies, and even started on the fence repairs despite his protests that it could wait. "Can't you've done more than enough?" Sam said as she hammered in a fence post with surprising skill. "You've more than earned your keep." Catherine paused in her work, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Sam, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you really offer to help me yesterday? And don't say it was just because of your mother's teachings. There's more to it than that." Sam set down his tools and considered her question seriously. "You want the honest truth?" "Always, because I recognize something in your eyes. The same thing I saw in my own mirror for months after I lost my parents. That look of someone who's been knocked down by life but refuses to stay down." He paused. "And because in 3 years of living alone out here, you're the first person who's made this place feel less empty." Catherine felt her breath catch. The simple honesty of his words, the way he looked at her like she was worth something, made her feel like crying and laughing at the same time. "Sam," she said softly, but before she could continue, the sound of approaching horses cut through the afternoon air. 3 riders were approaching through the snow, and from their appearance and the way they rode, Sam knew immediately they weren't bringing good news. Chapter 3. Unwelcome Visitors. The 3 men who rode up to Sam's fence were the kind that made honest folks cross the street. Their leader, a heavy-set man with a thick beard and cold eyes, sat his horse like he owned everything he surveyed. The 2 men flanking him had the lean, dangerous look of hired guns. "You Sam Harrison?" the bearded man called out. "I am," Sam replied, moving protectively closer to Catherine. "And you are?" "Name's Briggs. Walt Briggs. This here's my land you're squatting on." Sam felt his blood run cold. "I have a deed to this property, legal and proper. Bought it from Mrs. Henderson 6 years ago." Briggs laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Well now, that's where you're wrong, friend. See, Mrs. Henderson didn't have the right to sell. This land belongs to the Consolidated Cattle Company, and I'm their representative." "That's impossible," Sam said. But even as he spoke, a sick feeling was growing in his stomach. He'd heard rumors about Consolidated, a big Eastern company that was buying up ranch land throughout Wyoming, sometimes through questionable means. "Got the papers right here," Briggs said, patting his coat pocket. "Surveyed proper and everything. Turns out the old Henderson place was built on company land. Makes the deed you got worthless as a $3 bill." Catherine watched the exchange with growing alarm. She'd seen this kind of intimidation before. Powerful interests using legal technicalities to steal from those who couldn't fight back. "Even if that were true," Sam said carefully, "I'd have rights as an improver. 6 years of building and working this land counts for something. Might count for something if you had the money to fight it in court," one of the gunmen said with a smirk. "But legal fights cost more than most folks can afford." "Course, we're reasonable men," Briggs continued. "Consolidated don't want trouble. They're willing to offer you compensation for your improvements. Say $200 for the house and barn." Sam's jaw tightened. "So I've got more than $2,000 invested in this place, not counting 6 years of work." "200's a fair offer," Briggs said, his tone turning harder. More than fair, considering you got no legal right to be here at all. And if I refuse? Briggs looked at his companions, then back at Sam. Well, that would be unfortunate. See, Consolidated needs this land cleared by spring. They got plans for it. Big plans. Man would hate to see his improvements get damaged in the process of clearing. The threat was barely veiled. Catherine felt anger flare in her chest at the casual cruelty of it. Here was Sam, a good man who'd worked honestly for everything he had, being robbed by men who hid behind legal papers and implied violence. How long do I have to think about it? Sam asked. 3 days, Briggs said. We'll be back Thursday for your answer, and your removal one way or another. And the woman? One of the gunmen asked, his eyes sliding over Catherine in a way that made her skin crawl. What about her? Sam stepped slightly in front of Catherine, just wondering if she comes with the property, the man said with a leering grin. Sam's hand moved toward the pistol on his hip. You can wonder all you want, but you keep your eyes to yourself. Briggs held up a hand before things could escalate. Now. No need for unpleasantness. Yet he gathered his reins. 3 days, Harrison. Think carefully about our offer. It's the only one you're going to get. The 3 men rode away, leaving Sam and Catherine standing in the snow. The peaceful afternoon shattered. Sam, Catherine said softly. I'm so sorry. Not your fault, Sam replied, but his voice was hollow. He stared after the riders, his mind racing. So I should have known this was too good to last. Catherine studied his profile, seeing the defeat beginning to settle in his shoulders. You're not going to fight them. Sam turned to look at her. Fight them how? You heard what they said. This would take lawyers, courts, money I don't have. Even if I could prove my deed is valid, how long would that take? How much would it cost? So you're just going to let them steal everything you've worked for? Catherine, you don't understand how this works. Men like Briggs, companies like Consolidated, they don't lose. They have money, connections, hired guns. People like me, we survive by knowing when we're beaten. Catherine felt something fierce rise up in her chest. People like us, she corrected, and I know exactly how this works. I've seen powerful men destroy good people just because they can. The question is, are you going to let them? Sam looked at her with surprise. What choice do I have? You fight, Catherine said simply. Maybe you lose, maybe you don't, but you fight because it's your home, your life, your work. You fight because rolling over just makes it easier for them to do this to the next person. Catherine, you don't know what you're saying. These men are dangerous. And you think I don't know dangerous? Catherine's eyes flashed. Do you think walking alone across Wyoming with nothing but the clothes on my back was safe? Do you think facing down a man like Ashford took no courage? Sam stared at her. This woman who had appeared at his gate like an answer to a prayer, now standing in his yard with snow in her hair and fire in her eyes, ready to fight his battles alongside him. What are you saying? I'm saying that for the first time in months, I've found a place that feels like home. I'm saying that you shared your bread with a stranger when you had no reason to trust me. I'm saying that I'm not going to watch good people get destroyed by bad ones if there's anything I can do to help. Sam felt something shift in his chest, something that had been cold and resigned, suddenly warming into hope. Catherine, this isn't your fight, isn't it? Catherine stepped closer to him. Sam, in 2 days you've given me more kindness than I've known in years. You've treated me with respect. When others saw me as disposable, you've made me feel like I matter again. She reached up and touched his face gently. Maybe I can't offer you much, but I can offer you this. You don't have to face whatever comes next alone. Sam covered her hand with his, amazed by this woman who had stumbled into his life and immediately made it better. Catherine, if we fight this and lose, then we lose together, she said simply. Yeah, but if we don't fight at all, we've already lost everything that matters. As they stood there in the gathering dusk, snow beginning to fall again around them, Sam realized that somewhere between yesterday's storm and this moment, everything had changed. He was no longer just fighting for a ranch. He was fighting for a future he'd never dared to imagine. All right, he said finally, we fight. But first, we need to know exactly what we're up against. Catherine smiled, and Sam felt his heart skip. Then we'd better get started. We only have 3 days. As they walked back toward the house, Catherine's hand in Sam's, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the ridge above the ranch. Briggs had left one of his men behind to keep an eye on things, and what he'd seen made him smile coldly. The rancher had found himself an ally. That just meant there would be 2 people to deal with instead of 1. But first, He had a message to send to his boss. Consolidated Cattle Company was going to be very interested to know that Sam Harrison wasn't planning to go quietly. The real fight was just beginning. Chapter 4. What Money Can't Buy. That evening, Sam and Catherine sat at his small table with papers spread between them like battle plans. Sam had retrieved his deed, survey maps, and every document related to his purchase of the ranch from Mrs. Henderson. Catherine studied each paper with the careful attention of someone who understood that details could mean the difference between justice and defeat. Your deed looks legitimate, Catherine said, adjusting the oil lamp to get better light. The signatures appear genuine, and the legal language is proper. But, Sam prompted. But if Consolidated has money and influence, they could have arranged for conflicting surveys, forged documents, even bribed officials to support their claim. Catherine looked up at him. The question is, what proof do we have that your purchase was legitimate? Sam pulled out a worn letter. Mrs. Henderson wrote to me after the sale, thanking me for helping her get a fresh start in California. She mentioned having clear title inherited from her late husband. Catherine read the letter carefully. This helps, but we need more. Did she mention how her husband acquired the land? Original homestead papers, land grant documents, anything that would establish a clear chain of ownership. She might have mentioned something about homesteading, Sam said, trying to remember conversations from 6 years ago. Her husband came out here in the late 60s, I think. If he filed proper homestead papers and proved up the claim, that would establish legitimate ownership that predates any corporate land grab, Catherine said, her voice growing excited. Do you know where those papers might be? Sam shook his head. Mrs. Henderson took most of her important documents with her to California. Catherine sat back, thinking, what about the county land office in Cheyenne? They would have records of all homestead filings and patent grants. That's 40 miles through winter weather, and we only have 3 days. Then we'd better leave at first light, Catherine said matter-of-factly. Sam stared at her. Catherine, that's a hard ride in good weather. In winter, it's dangerous, and even if we make it, there's no guarantee we'll find what we need. Maybe not, Catherine agreed. Say, but it's better than sitting here waiting for Briggs to come back and steal everything you've worked for. As they continued planning into the night, Sam found himself studying Catherine in the lamplight. She approached their problem with the same methodical intelligence she'd brought to barn work, but now he could see the education beneath, the way she analyzed legal documents, the strategic thinking that came from a mind trained in literature and logic. You're remarkable, you know that, he said suddenly. Catherine looked up from the papers, startled. What? Yesterday, you were a stranger who could barely stand from exhaustion. Tonight, you're planning legal strategy like you were born to it. I've never met anyone like you. Catherine felt warmth spread through her chest at the admiration in his voice. I told you I was a quick learner. It's more than that, Sam said, leaning back in his chair. You've been through hell, lost your parents, lost your position, had to walk across hostile territory with nothing. Most people would be broken by that, but you just keep fighting. What choice do I have? Catherine asked quietly. You could have kept walking yesterday, could have made it to Cheyenne and started over again. Instead, you stayed to help a man you barely know fight a battle that isn't yours. Catherine was quiet for a moment, then looked up at him with something vulnerable in her eyes. Sam, can I tell you something? Anything. When I was walking toward your ranch yesterday, I was so tired and cold and hungry that I honestly thought about just stopping, just sitting down in the snow and letting whatever happened happen. She paused. I've never told anyone that before. Sam felt his heart clench. Catherine, but then I saw your house and the smoke from your chimney, and something inside me said, not yet. And when you offered to share your food, your warmth, your kindness, Catherine's voice grew soft, you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Hope, she said simply. Hope that there are still good people in the world. Hope that kindness still exists. Hope that maybe I don't have to face everything alone. Sam reached across the table and took her hand. You don't, not anymore. Catherine looked down at their joined hands. His work roughened and strong, hers smaller but marked by their own share of labor. Sam, what happens after this is over. If we win, if we lose, what happens to us? It was the question Sam had been avoiding all day. I don't know, he admitted. I know what I hope happens. Tell me. Sam was quiet for a long moment, gathering courage. I hope that whatever we find in Cheyenne, whatever happens with Briggs and Consolidated, you decide to stay, not as a guest, not as someone working for her keep, but as my partner. In all of this, Catherine felt her breath catch. Sam. I know it's crazy, he said quickly. I know we've only known each other 2 days, but Catherine, I've lived alone for 3 years, and in 2 days you've made this place feel more like home than it ever has. You've made me feel more like myself than I have since I lost my parents. Catherine stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. Sam's reflection appeared beside hers in the glass. What if I'm not who you think I am? she asked softly. What if I'm just someone who's been running so long she doesn't know how to stop? Sam turned her gently to face him. Then maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it's time to stand and fight for something worth having. Catherine looked up into his eyes and saw something there that took her breath away. Not just desire, but recognition. As if he saw not just who she was, but who she could be. Sam, she began, but he placed a gentle finger against her lips. You don't have to answer now, he said. Let's get through the next 3 days first. But I want you to know, whatever happens, having you here, having you fight beside me, it's given me something I'd forgotten I wanted. What's that? A reason to hope for the future. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen possibility instead of problems? When had anyone made her feel like she was worth fighting for? We should get some rest, Sam said reluctantly. Long ride tomorrow. Catherine nodded, but as they prepared to retire to their separate rooms, she turned back to him. Sam, thank you. For the bread, for the shelter, for the kindness, but mostly, thank you for making me remember who I used to be. Before everything went wrong, before I had to become someone just trying to survive. Who were you before? Sam asked gently. Catherine smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes completely. Someone who believed in happy endings. As she disappeared into her room, Sam stood by the dying fire and felt something settle in his chest, a certainty that whatever tomorrow brought, he would spend the rest of his life trying to give Catherine O'Brien reasons to believe in happy endings again. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and in the distance, a rider spurred his horse toward town with news that would change everything. Chapter 5. What no one ever had. Sam and Catherine left for Cheyenne before dawn, riding double on Sam's strongest horse through the crisp winter air. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crystalline and beautiful, but the 40-mile journey would still be treacherous. Catherine sat behind Sam, her arms around his waist, feeling safer than she had any right to feel given their circumstances. They made good time across the frozen prairie, stopping only to rest the horse and share jerky and coffee from Sam's thermos. As they rode, they talked about everything and nothing. Catherine's childhood on the Massachusetts farm, Sam's memories of his mother's garden, dreams they'd carried and dreams they'd lost. Tell me about your parents, Catherine said as they paused to water the horse at a creek. Sam's face grew soft with memory. Pa was a quiet man but fair, never raised his voice, never raised his hand. Ma used to say he could gentle a wild horse just by talking to it. He smiled. Ma was the talker in the family. She could make friends with a fence post if she set her mind to it. They sound wonderful. They were. They would have loved you, I think. Catherine felt warmth bloom in her chest at the thought of being welcomed by people who had raised a man like Sam. The Cheyenne Land Office was a small, cluttered building that smelled of old paper and tobacco smoke. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked up from his ledgers with the weary expression of someone who dealt with land disputes daily. Help you folks? We need to research homestead records for land about 40 miles southeast, Sam explained. The Henderson place, original filing would have been late 1860s, early 70s. The clerk sighed and led them to a wall of filing cabinets. Henderson, you said. Let me see what we got. It took 2 hours of searching through dusty files, but finally the clerk emerged with a folder. Here we go. James Henderson filed homestead claim in 1868. Proved up in 1873. Patent granted free and clear. Catherine and Sam exchanged excited glances. Can we see the documentation? The clerk spread the papers on a table. There it was. Clear evidence that James Henderson had legally homesteaded the land, met all requirements, and received a government patent for 160 acres that included exactly the property Sam had purchased. So this proves legitimate ownership, Catherine said, studying the survey markers. Henderson had clear title to convey to you. Now what? Sam asked. Now we make copies and get back before Briggs returns, Catherine said. This evidence should be enough to challenge any claim Consolidated might make. But as they prepared to leave Cheyenne, Sam noticed several men in expensive suits entering the land office behind them. One of them was asking the clerk about recent research on Henderson properties. We need to go, Sam said quietly. Now they rode hard for home, the precious documents secured in Sam's saddlebags. But the winter day was short, and by the time they reached familiar territory, dusk was falling and their horse was exhausted. There, Catherine pointed ahead, the lights of your house. But as they approached, Sam's blood ran cold. Too many horses were tied at his fence. Too many men were moving around his property. Briggs, Sam said grimly. He's early. They dismounted and approached cautiously. Briggs and 6 men were loading furniture and belongings from Sam's house into a wagon. The bearded man looked up with mock surprise as Sam and Catherine appeared. Well now, Harrison, thought you might have run off. Saved us the trouble of evicting you. I still have until tomorrow, Sam said, his hand resting on his pistol. Plans changed, Briggs replied with a cold smile. Consolidated decided they needed this land cleared immediately. Don't worry though, we're being real careful with your things. Sam watched helplessly as years of his life were tossed carelessly into wagons. But Catherine stepped forward, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone stop what they were doing. Mr. Briggs, I assume you have legal documentation authorizing this seizure? Briggs looked at her with contempt. Lady, this ain't your concern. Actually, it is. Catherine pulled the homestead papers from Sam's saddlebags. These documents prove that James Henderson held legitimate patent to this land, which means his sale to Mr. Harrison was completely legal. Those papers don't mean nothing, Briggs said, but Sam could see uncertainty in his eyes. They mean everything, Catherine replied calmly. They establish clear chain of title that predates any claim Consolidated might fabricate, unless you have documentation proving the federal government made an error in their original land grant. You're the ones trespassing. One of Briggs' men whispered something urgent in his ear. The bearded man's face darkened. Might be you got papers, he said slowly. But accidents happen to papers, and to people who don't know when to quit. Sam stepped protectively in front of Catherine, but she placed a hand on his arm. Mr. Briggs, she said, her voice carrying across the yard, there's something you should know about these documents. What's that? Catherine smiled, and Sam saw something fierce and brilliant in her expression. Before we left Cheyenne, I made sure copies were filed with the Territorial Attorney General's office, the Federal Land Office, and the newspaper. If anything happens to these originals, or to us, there will be a very public investigation into Consolidated's land acquisition practices. Briggs stared at her for a long moment. You're bluffing. Am I? Catherine pulled a folded paper from her coat. Telegraph receipt. Sent to the territorial capital this afternoon. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you know how the system works. Sam looked at Catherine with amazement. While he'd been focused on the legal documents, she'd been thinking 3 steps ahead, protecting them with the kind of strategic planning that came from her educated background. Briggs' face went through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous pale, "This ain't over." "Yes," Catherine said firmly. "It is. Consolidated can try to fight this in court if they want, but they'll lose. And after today's little performance, they'll also face charges for illegal seizure and intimidation." Slowly, reluctantly, Briggs gestured to his men to unload Sam's belongings. "You made a powerful enemy today, lady." "I've had powerful enemies before," Catherine replied calmly. "The difference is, this time I'm not standing alone." As Briggs and his men rode away into the gathering darkness, Sam turned to Catherine with wonder and gratitude shining in his eyes. When did you? "While you were copying the homestead papers, I was thinking about what Briggs might try," Catherine said, suddenly looking exhausted. "I've seen men like him before, Sam. They only understand 2 things, power and exposure. So I made sure he understood we had both." Sam pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "Catherine, you saved everything. You saved my home, my life, my future, our future," Catherine corrected softly. Sam pulled back to look at her. "Does that mean?" Catherine looked around at the small ranch, at the house where she'd found warmth and safety, at the man who had shared his bread with a stranger, and then invited her to share his dreams. "Sam Harrison," she said, her voice steady and sure, "2 days ago you offered kindness to someone who had nothing to give in return. You shared your food, your shelter, your hope with someone who was ready to give up on everything." "Catherine, let me finish," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "Tonight, I want to give you something in return, something no one has ever given you before." "What's that?" Catherine smiled, and Sam saw his entire future in her eyes. "A partner who will never let you face anything alone. A woman who will fight for your dreams as fiercely as she fights for her own. Someone who sees the good man you are and wants to spend her life proving she's worthy of your faith in her." Sam felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Catherine, you don't owe me anything. This isn't about debt," Catherine said softly. "This is about choice. And I choose you, Sam Harrison. I choose this life we could build together. I choose to stop running and start living." As Sam kissed her there in the dooryard of his ranch, their ranch, Catherine realized that sharing his bread had been just the beginning. Tonight, she was offering him her heart, her strength, her unwavering loyalty, and her love. Things no one had ever given him before. Things she had never given anyone before. Things that would bind them together for all the years to come. 6 months later, as Catherine Harrison hung laundry on the line behind their expanded house, she could hear Sam's laughter mixing with the voices of neighboring ranchers who had come to help with the spring roundup. The land dispute with Consolidated had made them local heroes, and their story had spread throughout the territory as proof that sometimes Good people really could win. But for Catherine, the real victory wasn't in defeating powerful enemies or saving the ranch. It was in the simple joy of building a life with someone who had seen her at her lowest point and loved her anyway. Someone who had shared his bread with a stranger and received in return a partnership that made both of them stronger than they had ever been alone. As Sam caught her eye across the yard and smiled, Catherine touched the simple gold band on her finger and remembered the moment her real life had begun, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with a tired rancher offering kindness to someone who needed it most. Sometimes the greatest love stories began with the smallest acts of grace. The end.